Calling Andor the best Star Wars is like calling Anakin the best Jedi ever. It's true, but we'll come back to that.
You think I'm crazy?
If Andor Season 2 has one overwhelming message, it's that revolutionary is a job fit only for lunatics and egotists.
What have you heard?
As a career path, revolution offers only long hours, great danger, shitty accommodation,
No, I can't stay
and
that long.
an almost certain death after a long period of being tortured. Star Wars is the story of those mad enough and bad enough to join the rebellion, the lunatic scoundrels and heroes who become revolutionaries. And Andor is the story of what revolutions are really like: sad, violent, desperate, and
Not
doomed.
much of a revolution.
A rebellion that the characters in
yeah.
Andor often seem to regret ever having joined. Which raises the question, what are you rebelling against, Andor?
What do you got?
The obvious answer is the Empire. The Empire are space fascists. Their whole vibe screams Nazi, right down to the Hugo Boss style uniforms, with Emperor Palpatine as the fascist dictator Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. But Emperor Palpatine is also Darth Sidious, a Sith Lord who uses the dark side of the Force to subvert the good Republic and establish the evil Empire. This mirrors the common understanding that fascists like Adolf Hitler used hypnotic powers of persuasion and oratory to sway people towards fascism. But this isn't how fascism rose to power in reality.
Who the fuck are you?
I'm you when times get tough.
Star Wars is a fairy tale set in a galaxy far away and long ago. But Andor is Star Wars for grown-ups. Star Wars de-infantilized. Star Wars made real. To make Andor real, Tony Gilroy stripped out all of the fantasy elements. Jedi, gone. Lightsabers, AWOL. Darth Vader, in hiding. And even the Emperor is made to keep his distance. In my 2 previous video essays on Andor, we thought about how Tony Gilroy made Star Wars real, and how he created the reality of revolution by basing Cassian Andor on the early life of Joseph Stalin. The BBC even ripped off my research to report this, so it must be true. Inspiring Andor to join the rebellion with Nemik's revolutionary manifesto, and even ending Season 1 with an uprising of the workers, which gave Andor a vibe close to the revolutionary philosophy of Karl Marx, aka Marxism, which does come as a surprise in a streaming show from the corporate entertainment giant Disney. But when we make space fascists real, we're faced with some tough questions about the reality of fascism. Leon Trotsky, the Russian revolutionary and the inspiration for Nemik's manifesto in Season 1 of Andor, described fascism as the hammer capitalism uses to smash the workers. In the early 20th century, worker-led socialist revolutions rippled around the world. In Russia, China, Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, socialist states arose. In response, capitalists in many nations, including Italy and Germany, funded fascist political movements to resist socialist movements. Benito Mussolini was a newspaper editor and socialist activist who turned against socialism and, with the backing of Italian industrialists and landowners, founded the Black Shirts to violently smash trade unions and workers' movements, including the torture and murder of tens of thousands of socialists. In Germany, Adolf Hitler's Nazi party never won more than a few % of votes from workers, but was supported by the wealthy middle class and funded by some of Germany's largest corporations. The first victims of the concentration camps were German socialists. George Lucas hints at the real powers behind Palpatine in the prequel trilogy, with his rise supported by the intergalactic banking clan and the separatist confederacy to stop the power of the Republic. The space Nazis of Star Wars, like the real Nazis of the World War, were funded by capitalism. Now we have to talk about the inevitable fascism is socialism comment that someone is typing right now below this video. Nope, there's a short essay on the Patreon linked in the description below. There's a good reason Luthen Ryle only communicates from a secure console in his antique store, because every good member of the Rebel Alliance understands the operational importance of privacy. And because in a galaxy long, long ago, they didn't have VPNs, virtual private networks that encrypt a tunnel through hyperspace to keep your data secure from the evil Empire. Thanks to private internet access for sponsoring this video. I use private internet access to help keep up to date with streaming shows for the science fiction channel and to coordinate my cell of rebels against the Empire. Private internet access keeps no logs of your activity, and unlike other VPNs, this has been proven in court multiple times and independently audited by Deloitte. And if you're struggling to stream Andor Season 2, private internet access works with all major streaming services in every region. Just flip your IP location and you too can stream Disney Plus Tatooine. By using my link in the description, you can get 83% off on private internet access. That's just $2.03 a month. And you also get 4 extra months completely free. Capitalism has always been in the background of Star Wars. In the original trilogy, we saw that Uncle Lars was a struggling moisture farmer, while Lando Calrissian was an honest businessman. The prequels show us trade federations, deal-making, and the political machinery of a capitalist galaxy. And the reboots went so far as to expose the military-industrial complex, selling weapons to both sides of this Star War. If Star Wars is based on our reality, then our reality is capitalist. It's not like galaxy-spanning sci-fi has to be capitalist. Contrast the capitalist galaxy of Star Wars to the anti-capitalist galaxy of Star Trek.
This is the 24th century. Material needs no longer exist.
Tony Gilroy makes the decision to show us the gritty detail of the capitalist system that orders the Star Wars universe. Season 1 of Andor showed us the vast factories of Ferrix, still manned by humans despite abundant droid labor, because Ferrix is a depiction of peak industrial capitalism. The seedy corporate-controlled world of Milana 1, the prison factory of Narkina 5, and the strip mining of Cassian Andor's homeworld. Andor is obsessed with showing the bleak capitalist reality of the Star Wars galaxy. Because to make Andor real, Tony Gilroy has to make Andor capitalist. To depict the reality of revolution, Gilroy draws heavily on the life of real revolutionary Joseph Stalin and on the words of Leon Trotsky, and the politics of Vladimir Lenin for Luthen. And all of these revolutionaries were revolutionary against capitalism. It's perhaps the most ballsy decision in a sci-fi TV show since they killed the entire crew of Blake 7 to base Season 2 of Andor on a state-led conspiracy to commit genocide. The aesthetics of the meeting are clearly based on the Wannsee Conference, a meeting of 15 officials from branches of the German state and military to coordinate the final solution, the last stage of the Nazi genocide of the Jewish people. And it's clear that the Empire is willing to commit absolute genocide against the population of Gorman, because that's what fascists do, right? Well, not only fascists, but in fact the Empire's aim is more directly imperialist. The Empire wants to exert its power over a semi-autonomous region. This plan is similar to schemes of the British and Russian empires during the Great Game of the 19th century. The full list of famines, massacres and genocides conducted by the British and other colonial empires in our 200 years as global hegemony would occupy most of this essay. As one example, the concentration camp was invented by the British for the Boer War. Everything the Nazis knew about fascism, they learnt from British imperialism as a tool of imperial power. Under the imperial power play, however, is a bluntly capitalist motivation. Gorman has essential minerals that must be extracted. Everything else is just a pretext for that aim. On this level, the Gorman plot resembles such CIA-backed plots against banana republics as the 1954 Guatemalan coup, overthrowing the elected government on behalf of United Fruit to protect the power of capital. As the Ministry of Enlightenment outlines its propaganda plan against Gorman, it's likely that we, the audience, have been exposed to exactly this kind of propaganda against foreign states when their resources were needed by capital. Dedra's plan to encourage
You need Gorman rebels you can depend on to do the wrong thing.
echoes any number of contemporary acts of terrorism that may or may not have been staged for political advantage. This is how Tony Gilroy and his team like to do political allegory, with universals rather than specifics. Even when we see the Gorman speaking with heavy French accents, the Gorman resistance is a universal symbol of many resistance movements, including, but not limited to, Nazi-occupied France. In this one sequence, Andor gives us what Star Wars has never really given us before: the political realities of power in the Galactic Empire. Power fundamentally driven by the logic of capitalism.
In school, I was of the angry young man.
Sure, you were a rebel.
You did something very interesting with Star Wars, if you think about it. The good guys are the rebels. They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. I think we call those guys terrorists.
When I did it, they were Viet Cong.
Right.
The English
British
Empire, the
Empire.
American Empire,
Yeah.
lost.
Star Wars is about a rebellion against an empire. But which empire? And which rebellion? In interviews, Star Wars creator George Lucas cites two real-life revolutions as inspiration. One of these rebellions looks much like the American Revolution of the Founding Fathers against the British Empire. Imperial Star Destroyers are much like the British gunboats that enforced imperial power worldwide. The Imperial Officer Corps all speak in clipped English, while the Emperor has a gentle Scottish burr, accents of the British Empire. And the rebellion is fought for the Republic, the form of government the rebellion adopted after the fall of the Empire. But let's remember that the British were first and foremost a capitalist power for over 2 centuries. Britain's empire was actually built by capitalist corporations like the East India Company. The term the British Empire was only officially adopted in 1877, over 200 years into its history, with the crowning of Queen Victoria as Empress. If a global capitalist empire that doesn't call itself an empire and rules through corporations sounds familiar, it's because we British invented the capitalist imperial system that you Yanks inherited after World War II. The American War was less a revolution than a power struggle over who would control the global empire of capitalism. George Lucas has also stated multiple times that he had another revolution in mind when making Star Wars. The brutal Death Star is like a spherical Nimitz-class aircraft carrier from which F-4 Phantoms flew like TIE fighters. And the Rebel Alliance are like the revolutionary forces who fought for the freedom of Vietnam from capitalist imperialism. George Lucas has said again and again that Star Wars was inspired by the Viet Cong. Cong means communist. The Viet Cong were communist revolutionaries. And Star Wars is, and always has been, from George Lucas and the Viet Cong to Tony Gilroy and the life of Stalin, the story of a socialist revolution against capitalism. In our reality, the modern era has been bookended by two kinds of revolution. The Dutch Revolt concluding in 1648, the English Civil War and the Inglorious Revolution of 1688, the American Revolutionary War ending in 1783, and the French Revolution of 1789 to 99, were revolutions against the material system of feudal monarchies, in which lords owned the land and everyone else served them as serfs that had dominated the world for 1,000 years. These revolutions replaced feudal monarchies with capitalist republics. Except in England, where we only managed a constitutional monarchy. If English people still look like oppressed commoners, that's because we literally and legally are. A new class of capitalists now owned the means of production, and most people were employed, no longer serfs, but as wage labour.
I'm in charge here, Mother.
It might not feel like it while you're on shift at McDonald's or an Amazon fulfillment centre, but being wage labour is a substantial step up from being a serf. Kind of, unless you're forced into urban slums to work in factories until you die of cholera, which was the condition for most of the new working class in the Industrial Revolution, which is why in the 18 and 1900s, a second wave of revolutions began.
Don't move or I'll kill you.
The Russian Revolution in 1917, the Chinese Communist Revolution of 1927 to 49, the Spanish Revolution of 1936, the Vietnam War of 1955 to 1975, and dozens more brought socialist governments to power in over half the world, or were crushed by fascist counter-revolutions, backed by capitalists.
We need the empire to help. We need them angry. We need them coming down hard. Oppression breeds rebellion, but together...
Krieger's a separatist. Maipei's a neo-republican. They're lost! All of them lost!
As we watch Lufan and Saw Gerrera, a character deliberately named and styled on Che Guevara, we learn that both are conflicted revolutionaries. Mon Mothma and her kind are wealthy capitalists seeking the restoration of their capitalist republic against the threat of aggression back into feudal monarchy. They and the rebel alliance we see in the movie are more like a government in exile following a coup d'etat that saw Lufan and Cassian dream of a galaxy of the kind described in Nemec's manifesto. These men are true revolutionaries.
Remember this. Try.
Cassian Andor is an indigenous person from a world colonized and strip-mined for its resources. One inspiration for Cassian's character is the revolutionary life of Joseph Stalin, including his bank robberies and imprisonment. But arguably, Cassian Andor, searching for a sister forced into sex work after the displacement of their tribe, is even more influenced by Latin American revolutionaries of the South and Central Americas. There's an obvious visual resemblance, again, between Cassian Andor and Che Guevara, iconic from the red and black poster that is hung on the wall of so many student bedsits. Guevara fought in Fidel Castro's revolution to take Cuba back from capitalist domination and
Michael,
the American mafia.
bigger than US Steel.
Revolutions against the capitalist exploitation of natural resources raged across Nicaragua and El Salvador until the 1980s. And let's remember again, Cassian's homeworld was not strip-mined by the Empire. This capitalist resource extraction was clearly standard practice under the Republic. Andor Season 2 shows the fate of displaced native peoples. Bix Colleen and her friends are now refugees, employed as agricultural labour, facing persecution by Imperial customs enforcement. As Andor Season 2 screened, millions of immigrant workers in the United States were facing the same kind of hypocrisy and persecution. In the words of Andor Season 2,
Councils need the help or there's no harvest.
The help is undocumented.
And to confirm Andor Season 2's overt political tensions, the term undocumented is emphasized in the dialogue. Actress Adriana Arjuna's Puerto Rican Guatemalan heritage echoes the origins in the global south of so many of the world's immigrant workers, routinely persecuted in our capitalist system. We will never know how many young female immigrant workers experience the sexual abuse depicted in Andor Season 2. We do know it's a common violation. And too much for some Star Wars fans. When a Star Wars fan channel with 3 million followers complains about Star Wars being too real, it tells you something. Seeing Adriana Arjuna as an undocumented worker defending herself from being sexually assaulted by the immigration police was too much for Star Wars theory. But it's not violence the fans can't stomach. A New Hope has amputated limbs, burned bodies, and Princess Leia being tortured by her own dad. What average consumers like Star Wars theory can't handle is seeing depictions of the real political events happening in their own country that they are happy ignoring. Because Andor made Star Wars again what it has not been for a very long time. Political.
You look at the situation now, where America is so proud of being the biggest economy, the most powerful military force on the planet. It's become the empire of the world.
Was the empire during the Vietnam War.
So this is how liberty dies.
We're in the middle of it right now.
To thunderous applause.
Star Wars has never really been political. In fact, Star Wars has always been radically depoliticized. Sure, George Lucas was a maker of intensely political indie movies who smuggled an anti-capitalist allegory for the Vietnam War with the American Empire into a sci-fi blockbuster. But George Lucas became a victim of his own success. The politics of A New Hope are so obscured under layers of mystification and fantasy that they are effectively obliterated.
I want to learn the ways of the Force.
If the original Star Wars is political, then what are its politics? It's against authoritarian government. Okay, so what are the Jedi theocracy who dish out extrajudicial executions with laser swords all about them? Far from politicizing the culture by inventing the sci-fi blockbuster, George Lucas initiated the tidal wave of meaningless cinematic spectacle that washed away the highly political science fiction of the 60s and 70s. The Disney-era Star Wars is mostly just lowest common denominator corporate entertainment product, with occasional bits of culture war virtue signaling scattered over the top at random. Does it make any sense for a fleet admiral to be wearing a cocktail outfit? None. But it really angered the Republidorks, which was the only point. Culture wars and fantasy spectacle are both there to distract us from political reality. Their defect is to depoliticize mass culture. Then along came Andor, to make Star Wars real, with a real political critique of, do I really need to say it again?
Don't talk. Don't think. Do as you are told. If you can't manage that, you don't belong here.
The critical drinker's response to Andor Season 2's first story arc missed a trick. Andor's theft of an experimental TIE fighter begins with Cassian calming an Imperial traitor. Cassian knows this young, naive woman has almost certainly destroyed her life. But he can't afford to let her panic.
Right now.
So he gives her an inspiring, emotional call to action that he himself cannot possibly believe. Andor Season 2 is where we start to see the corrosive cost of fighting the Empire for a true revolutionary.
Got 15 blasters pointed at you right now. Don't tell him that.
Anyone who's spent time among leftist activist groups will recognize the Maya Pei Brigade,
Judean People's Front. For the People's Front of Judea.
who are not the People's Front of Judea, but the Judean People's Front, a crew of lunatics and losers who are the best the rebellion can get. Capitalism extracts value from anyone competent. It sets up endless games and hierarchies, status structures and ranking systems to keep you running the rat race. Dedra and Cyril are alienated humanity, entirely dominated by the system of capitalism. Desperate for any meaning, Cyril finds it in dead bureaucracy. Dedra is Andor's most pitiful victim. She's lived her entire life in the system and now serves the system that arrested and almost certainly tortured, then killed her own parents. Dedra and Cyril are not lovers. As Herbert Marcuse argued in Eros and Civilization, the relentless competition of capitalist life makes love impossible. Instead, their relationship is of dominance and submission, the political logic of capitalism colonizing the personal. And, right, yes, no, the critical drinker gets none of this. Andor Season 2 goes so far over Will Jordan's head, you might as well ask a Dachshund to comment on Goethe. But even if the drinker had understood anything that was happening in Andor Season 2, he can't say any of it to most of his audience. Most people don't want to critique the reality we live in. We want escapism and fantasy. So all Will can say about Andor is that
it was a slow burn, to be sure.
Apparently the 3-day wedding to join the clans of Mothma and Skeldon was also slow. Serving excellent drama like Andor after decades of Disney Star Wars is like serving real food at McDonald's without the constant stimulation of space battles and lightsaber fights. A lot of people can't taste the more subtle flavours presented. I mean, showing the social elite literally married to the local mob boss seems like a pretty clear way of symbolising how the capitalist system inevitably ends up being run by gangsters.
Speak up. Stand up.
Tay Colmer's turn against Mon Mothma isn't motivated by ideology or belief. Tay is a capitalist who has lost his capital after his investments failed. Unlike old money like Mothma, the new money capitalists are always unstable and at risk. Capitalism is even unstable for the capitalists, driving the system's endless exploitation. Mothma ends the wedding dancing her brains out, quite literally, to escape the emotional fallout of her own rebellion. She's lost her daughter's trust after marrying her to the mob, and Luthen has berated her for leaving him with the dirty work. Senator Mon Mothma is a liberal politician who believes in the system and wants to protect it from the rise of a fascist empire. But even as she's exposed to the true gangsterism and exploitation of that system, she's unwilling to take on the true costs of revolution against the system. That cost will be paid by the socialist revolutionaries as the liberals enjoy their dance party. Is Cassian Andor a rebel or a terrorist? As we watch the CIA, ISB, manufacture a rebel terrorist movement on Gorman that they can later use to justify the planetary resource extraction and genocide, it's probably only Star Wars theory and the critical drinker not thinking about the decades-long war on terror that has now been swept back under the carpet as the vital resources needed for capitalism to continue are now in other locations that require different strategies. Because the difference between a rebel and a terrorist is which side you're on.
Right. Director Krennic, Luthen Rail.
How pleasant to see you free of the witness stand.
Ah, my rebel is your terrorist. Something like that.
When director Krennic throws this distinction at his political opponent Mon Mothma, we instantly know that the acts of Cassian Andor are being described as terrorism, in the same propaganda we see used against Gorman and repeated by Cyril's mother and other citizens of the Imperial Core.
You are watching too much Imperial news.
No doubt, Luke Skywalker will also be denounced as a terrorist for his heinous attack on the patriotic military personnel doing their duty on the Death Star. The Tarkin tragedy? Of course, a freak malfunction of a tracking system is a regrettable incident, but a senior Imperial officer would never deliberately harm civilians. And we can imagine the public outrage about a terrorist strike against medical personnel on Coruscant itself. If we dig into the story, we might even discover the unit was developing advanced interrogation techniques. Then watch the sneering denial that such ideas are nothing but conspiracy theories.
Doesn't matter to you, does it? You're thinking small, you're thinking like a thief.
I'm thinking like a soldier.
Think like a leader.
The fight against galactic capitalism in its late stage as fascist imperialism is as dangerous as it gets. So the revolutionary has to be more ruthless than the system he fights. But watching the relationship between Cassian and Luthen through Andor Season 2, we have the same hard decision to make as Andor himself. Is Luthen Rael the ruthless but dedicated leader of a true revolution? Or is he the kind of egotist and sociopath so often drawn to revolutionary movements as a cover for their own thirst for power?
Many people, even some Gormans, have already been asking how long the Empire's patience can be tested. And here we are this morning with rumours of a general strike and mass demonstrations.
But because it's a grotesque insult to the British people, it's a deliberately provocative day to choose for such a march. It's a deliberately provocative march.
As the massacre and genocide of Gorman unfolds, as we watch newscasters shaping our hatred against the victims, as we see the staged provocation used to justify what follows, as we see that even the Imperial commander is destroyed by the Empire, we can see two overlapping stories. One is the story of an evil space emperor, finally made actually evil in the fantasy of Star Wars. The other, whether you choose to call it fascism, imperialism, or capitalism, is the real evil in our own empire.
The loss of an objective reality.
The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil.
This chamber's hold on the truth was finally lost on the Gorman Plaza, was unprovoked genocide.
Calling Andor the best Star Wars is like calling Anakin the best Jedi, because sure, he is the best Jedi. If it wasn't for that pesky differential in ground heights and having the red-pilled psychology of a Fortan shitposter, Anakin would have totally not ended up a frazzled Sith in a cyber support gimp suit. Anakin was the one who came to save the Jedi. But in the end, it was the best Jedi who destroyed the Jedi. Star Wars was a child's make-believe sci-fi fantasy of space Nazis versus space wizards with starships imagined from pizza slices and bow ties. By making Star Wars real, Tony Gilroy has made the best Star Wars. But Andor also raises one difficult, awkward question after another about the real world that created Star Wars. Is capitalism freedom, or just new kinds of exploitation? Is fascism an evil Sith-like force, or is it just capitalism when times get tough? Are the revolutionaries against capitalism the Rebel Alliance, or criminal terrorists? Is the United States a force for good, or just another evil empire? When you take a fairy tale of good versus evil and make it real, it's natural to ask, who is good and who is evil? There are no easy answers for these questions. And that's the problem. Because these are all the questions that average consumers of Star Wars consume Star Wars to not think about. Star Wars is a corporate entertainment franchise produced by the largest entertainment corporation of them all, and neither consumers or corporations want to think about the reality of capitalism. Which is likely why Andor, the best Star Wars, is only getting one rushed second season in place of 4. If Star Wars is the entertainment franchise the Empire streams to its faithful citizens, Andor is a pirate broadcast coming in from the Rebel Alliance. Will even average consumers of Star Wars be happy to go back to corporate-approved slop? Andor is not the one to save Star Wars. Andor is the one to destroy Star Wars.